Hey everyone, this week our guest is Davis Jaeger, the VP of R&D for MrBeast Feastables. Davis had a unique start to his career. Out of high school, he worked in restaurants as a chef until his mid-20s when he decided to go to college for food science. He has a passion for those new to the industry and wants to help the next generation with their careers. Just like the way that Davis got into the industry, his career path hasn't quite been typical. He worked in many different segments in the industry. With his current role, we of course talk all about chocolate and how his team is striving to make the best product possible. Davis and I become fast friends and we both love the food industry. I hope you have as much fun listening to this as we had recording it. If you are enjoying the Food Industry Insider, please follow and subscribe to the podcast. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We would really appreciate a 5-star review on both Apple Podcast and Spotify. This is a great zero-cost way to support our show. Hi, Davis. Thank you very much for talking with us today. I'm so excited to talk to you. I know presently you are the Vice President of Product Innovation with MrBeast Feastables, and I am anxious to hear about your career, how you ended up on doing this job. So we can start anywhere you want. You can begin with the beginning of your career and tell us anything you'd like us to know.
Sure, absolutely. That's a loaded question, Maureen, and I think that's by design. I've probably taken a bit of an atypical career path to get here. And it's funny because my wife is also same degree, same field, research and development. We both met in Food Science Club, actually. And, our reasons for getting into it and our career paths to that point and after have been very, very different. I was, since the age of 15, was a chef. I loved I was captivated by the romance of the kitchen, the knives and the partying and, the speed and the tattoos, all of it just spoke to me, right? And I was actually pretty good at it for a long time. I was, high school wasn't my thing. Grade school wasn't my thing. I was more of a, social being, let's say, and I fit right in pretty well in the culinary world. I was embraced, if you will. And I did quite well. And I did that pretty consistently for about a decade. Yeah. And around that time, I'm looking at my peers and fellow chefs, and I school of hard knocks, never went to culinary school, started at the bottom at every restaurant and worked my way up to the top or as high as I could go, meaning every station, different cuisines. That was my way of learning, right? And along the way, I kept training students right out of culinary school, and I'm looking going, it's about 25,000. I'm a chef. I don't get paid more than hourly. That's out of scope, right? So I was in it to win it, right? And about 10 years in, I'm looking around and, there's a lot of people that you work nights, holidays, weekends, you put in those long hours, you're getting cut and burned. It's not healthy, not conducive to a family or dating or anything. So it's really, you're in the kitchen, the people you work with or who you see, and the people after long amounts of time, they're not looking too happy, right? Some people are, but a lot of the people, there's, alcoholism seems to be pretty rampant within the culinary industry, right? And I was like, okay, this isn't going to end well for me. So I started looking at what else I could do. And my parents, they said, you know what? We heard about this thing called food science. And it was probably 2004, 2005, something around there. And I was like, okay, with this school, Clemson, and I, one, never heard of food science, two, never heard of Clemson. And I wrote this letter, very passionate, and food is my passion. Let me just set that clear. If that's not obvious, I got into it. I loved it. Never wanted to leave. Clearly still working with food. That's my passion. But I also wanted to find balance and maybe a girlfriend, family, weekends, wanted to sleep, normal stuff, Marie. And I wrote this letter to Clemson. It was like, hey, I barely graduated high school. I wasn't a great student, but here's what I love. And here's what my passion is in life. And it revolves around food, right? And it's not because I was good in the kitchen. It's because I love it. And I don't know why. I just am obsessed with it. It's, if you look at my Instagram, my wife has the typical kids and family photos. All I have are knives and food on my Instagram. If you want to see my family, you click the pictures that I'm tagged in, which is quite funny, but it's my identity, right? So I wrote this passion letter to the admissions office at Clemson, and it was probably within about 10 days later, I was like literally moving from Tampa, Florida to Clemson, South Carolina to move in. It's too old, didn't have any business being there, but I said, you know what? I'm paying for it myself. I'm dedicated. This is my passion. This is my Hail Mary. I want to do this.
Did you move into the dorms?
No, I fought them on that. I was like, listen, I'm actually a little old for this. I'm already of drinking age. I've lived on my own for many years. I'm not doing that. So they were like, hey, that's fine. Right. They let me I lived right off campus. I had roommates, though. That was a new experience because they were all younger. And I was able to buy alcohol for the house, let's say, right, which was fun. College, right?
You were very popular.
But it was, it was one of those things where it was like, this is my chance. Like, if that didn't happen, I don't know if we'd be talking right now. Probably wouldn't be, right? And I did not take it for granted. I definitely took out some loans, but I bootstrapped it essentially myself. I got a little bit of help from my parents, but for the most part, it was me. I worked kitchen jobs while I was there. I took out some loans and I was grinding because I wanted that paper, right? The problem is I wanted to find that something else, and that something else was CPG. And in order to get there, you need that ticket. That ticket's a degree, right? For more or less. That's what it is. So I was hyper-focused on that. Sat in the front of the classes. I still had fun on the weekends. Let me be clear here, right? So I didn't just overnight turn into a nerd. A different person. I was still myself. I was colorful. But I noticed with my peers, I was definitely different, right? Because I had a long history of work, being in the work industry, being a chef, having that social tendencies, right, was very different than the analytical crowd that I was in. So I was the president of Food Science Club, sat in front of the class, schmoozed with all my professors, both in school and out of school, right? So I was playing my cards. I found my sweet spot. And it worked, right? I was able to excel. I was able to get the attention of the professors. I was doing special projects. I was tapped into some of the grant programs, whether it was a microbiology focus, like traveling to every farmer's market and swabbing produce for fecal coliforms. I was like, sweet, I get to travel. I get to eat a restaurant while I'm out. They're giving me a stipend. Let's go. I loved it. Saw every county in South Carolina. Loved it. Getting paid like $20 an hour as a college student as well is like awesome. So I did that. And then I also, there was a grant program for like the high school programs. They're getting stipends for food within the cafeterias. And we were teaching them healthy eating, right? So I had my culinary background, culinology through the Research Chef Association was really where I was focusing in. Clemson was a huge advocate for that, right? My advisor, Aubrey Coffey, she was fantastic. She saw the crazy in me, but she saw the potential and she helped guide that. Both the negative and the positive in the right direction. And she brought me towards culinology, introduced me to Dr. Kondrasky as well, who was another fellow at school. They got me into a grant program, which was CU Chefs. And that was making shows on PBS for the local tri-state area. I mean, the Carolinas. Again, making $20 an hour. I was like, I'm rocking it. But I was also stroking my ego. I was on TV, wearing a chef coat. Like TV, I mean like local PBS, right? So let's be clear. I'm not signing autographs. No one probably watched it, but it was fun and it was a good experience, right? But all of those things were like engaging, and I was like, yeah, this is awesome. And I didn't do an internship. It was, recommended that you do, but I was still focused on getting the paper and what's next. And, my wife, she definitely did. Campbell's is a big intern pull from Clemson. Everyone does that. I was like, I want a job. And so I started aggressively looking for jobs. And when they graduated, I didn't even live in Clemson anymore. That's how focused I was on getting my foot in the door. I had already moved and was already working when they were walking. Didn't even participate. So thanks. Appreciate it. Love Clemson. Go Tigers. I got some stuff probably. But you know what? That wasn't the purpose. I met my girlfriend there, who's now my wife. I got score, and then I got my degree score, and I was off to the races, right? This is the next phase is what I was trying to unlock.
Did you get married before or after graduation?
No, I was an idiot. I should have gotten married sooner. We did the long distance thing for a while. She worked for Unilever. She went to the UK and she was ice cream focused. So we were doing long distance. That's where I got my Gen 1 iPad, was so we could FaceTime over the pond, right? But we, long distance thing worked out. I went to Florida, back to where I'm from, Tampa, because I had a job offer at Edam Foods. I don't know if you know Edam Foods. They're in, they do a lot of the roasting of veggies and bases for Campbell's, Clemson connection. So my advisor hooked me up with them, flew me out. It was really good, a lot of culinary base. I had a friend of the family in Tampa who's an entrepreneur call me and was like, hey, I'm thinking of this new concept. Do you want to be part of it, part of the founding group, and help me drive this in the direction it needs to go? And I was like, talked to my dad, and he's like, well, what do you have to lose at this point? If you don't do it now, you'll never do it, right? And look at me now in the entrepreneurial startup world. And that was called Fit Life Foods. It was packaged, prepared, healthy, indulgent meals. No kitchen, had to design the kitchen, base it on like a hospital cook chill flow process, got blast chillers in, worked with some rather popular resort chefs on spa-ish, healthy-ish, indulgent food meals that, ran through Genesis, used some of my knowledge, used some of my culinary. But it was about a year doing that. It was exhausting. I was probably doing 90-hour weeks. At the end, I've had about 30 chefs that worked for me. Made some really good decisions there with like the building and the teams and the menus. And I had the butcher station in one of the walk-ins. I was like, I'm a genius. And all these things were coming together. But I was working like 90 hours a week. And I think the business had very much grown outside of my skill set. Everything I was starting to do, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm falling forward. So we agreed on an exit for me. That allowed me to get closer to my girlfriend who was in New York and back. This was painful. And this was an experience in like learning from failures, right? And I've told everyone I've worked for about this, but it was, I was like sending resumes up north to the Jersey area in New York. There's a lot of CPGs. I'm like, flavor houses, CPGs. I'm like, someone's got to buy, right? I'm using recruiters. I'm trying everything I can. Nothing. So I'm unemployed. I'm living with my brother. And I'm like running out of money. I'm like, I got to do something, right? And I want to be with her as well. So I just said, forget it. Got rid of everything. Put everything I could in my, 97 Pathfinder. And I drove up to New Jersey and rented a room in the Heights from a now a friend of mine. But she was very nice. Didn't know me, took risk and just let me rent a room. It was like maybe 350 square feet, right? And my girlfriend lived in Hoboken, so it was close enough. I was not in Florida, and she, that far away. So I was knocking on doors that way, trying to get my foot in the door, talking to recruiters. Actually got tapped into a temp agency, but things didn't happen very fast. So I needed to pay my rent. I was tossing pizzas in a corner pizzeria in Jersey City. And I got fired from that job because I was, I had too many opinions on how to improve things. So it was a good lesson to learn. Right. And I'm sure people can relate to that. It was funny. I was actually ill. I think I had like the flu or a cold, and I had taken the day off. But I found out that I was let go because I went back in and they'd already replaced me. That was it. So a good slice of humble pie. And I'll never forget that for the rest of my life. And I was just an arrogant kid at that time. So it was a really good life lesson. But it's still, I was still knocking on doors, trying to get my foot in the door for CPG. And I remember her name was Telica, was the temp agency. And I went and met with them, and I didn't know how all that worked. And she got me an interview at Pinnacle Foods. And it was like, don't know what that is, but I know what these brands are, right? And I'm like, and I had no idea what CPG was going to be like, no clue at all, right? So I finally started as a temp. And I remember I was so hungry. I was grinding. I was pulling long hours. I was trying to go above and beyond. And again, it reminded me of when I was in college, how I was just a little different than the other people there, especially because I had culinary. So I worked on Duncan Hines on the innovation team, and I was in charge of cakes and brownies and frostings. And you talk about freshman 15, it was like freshman 30. That's an aside. But It was fun. And they finally hired me on full time. And I was like, that's it. We're clicking. I got the ticket fee from Clemson. I've got, I'm living next to my girlfriend now. Now I've got a big person job. I'm in it. I'm done. Right. And it was a good experience. And the best part of the experience, aside from getting the manufacturing experience and executive facing presentations and discussions, was my manager. He shaped me. He was awesome.
And who was that?
He's like a damn legend, Maureen. I don't know if you know who he is. And if he hears this, he's going to be like, shut up, Davis. But it was Chris Puno. I don't know if you know who he is, but he taught me everything that I like foundationally that I still reflect on today, right? Not only was he a good mentor, but he was a good leader, a good manager. He taught me, how to break some of the rules when they need to be broken, how to actually drive for results, how to see through the corporate minutia and jargon and posturing and all that nonsense. He really helped me hone some of my skill sets, and then a lot of the technical aspects, right? So like when things aren't going wrong, how do you manage it? Because that's what's important, and what do you look for in the technical, analytical deep dives, and how to leverage that and tell a story and influence people upwards, right? He did not act like, I'm up here and you're down here. He's like, we're in this together, bud, and he's great. I remember I used him for references until it felt weird. And I was like, I think I'm too old to ask for reference anymore. But he's great. He's had a good path. Loved his family, his kids. We're still friends. I could probably pick up the phone right now and call him, and he'd probably answer. I certainly would if he called me, but love the guys. You don't run across Chris Puno. He gets all my credit. But ever since Pinnacle, this is long-winded, but I was young again, and at that time we actually got married, my girlfriend and I. So we got to live in the same apartment.
That's cool. Wonderful. But we have to stop. We have to stop here for a second, because you and I did touch on this before. When I find two food scientists married to each other as a recruiter, I go, oh.
We make adorable young girls. So
I know, but I go, oh no. This is going to be painful, because somebody's going to lose. Unless you stay in the same town, you got to lose 2 jobs to go get that one. And that's why I told you, I said, you food scientists, everyone should always tell you, marry an accountant, marry a nurse, marry a teacher, marry a carpet layer, for heaven's sakes. Just don't marry someone in the food industry, because now you have to figure out who's going to move where. Unless you live in Chicago and there's tons of food companies.
Now we do, and that's because we learned our lesson. Right? I mean, we were young and married and kidless and said, there's this thing called corporate relo, and New Orleans looks pretty sweet. So both of us were trying to find cool places to live. We're like, we're just paying rent. Let's go, right? Let's go. Let's enjoy this corporate lifestyle. We're adults now. So we were gunning for different opportunities. She was a spec manager at Mondelez. So that could technically be a remote job. And it was at the time before remote jobs were even cool. So we took full advantage of that. And I found a job in New Orleans, was awesome, being the R&D manager for Smoothie King, which was fantastic. They were revamping their menu, all their dry proteins, functional ingredients. It was a really good time for us to connect. Because they had not had any technical R&D experience. Excuse me. And I was like, I want to live in New Orleans. I love the culture. I love Smoothie King, right? I was at that point, and still am, very into health and wellness, and I loved what they were trying to pitch. And the recruiter had reached out to me. I was reaching around trying to find some opportunities, and it ended up, we're taking the relo and we're moving. We were down there for a while, had our first daughter, bought our first house down there, had some great times. Mardi Gras is really fun. The weekends are great. Outside of that, when you live there, food's fantastic. But not for me and my wife. We didn't think it was the best place to raise a kid. And
now you have to grow up.
Right. Well, right. You also work there as well. And there's we have to work during the week now. Like when you're everyone from New Orleans, we're all doing the same thing unless you live there. And it's like, wait a minute. But it was fantasc. But it's partway through, had the daughter, and Melissa, my wife, they eliminated her role, right? So we were trying to figure out what she's going to do. Clearly, there were no other CPG jobs. like a couple handfuls, right? Maybe a Zatarain's or Tabasco, Avery Island. That's like almost 2 hours away. It was like, okay, what are we going to do here? So it was like panic mode set in, and I started looking for jobs that were in one of the big hubs, right? Colorado or Chicago or New York again. And I got keyed into U.S. foods through a friend of a friend from Clemson that knew my wife and I. Networking is your greatest tool.
Yes, it is.
And I remember Amanda helped me get an interview with the, I think it was the VP of R&D at the time, Stacy. And U.S. Foods was fun because it was going to leverage my culinary and the R&D with co-manufacturing. So all private label stuff, right? And a lot of ready-to-eat items, ice creams, you name it, they hit all categories. So I was excited to get exposure in different areas because I'd been cakes, brownies, frostings, and then smoothies, franchises, and proteins. And I was like, I want something a little more culinary. And
now, but U.S. Foods doesn't make anything, correct?
So the private label business, they don't have manufacturing. They co-manufacture and co-pack. But they do have R&D that does formulate formal commercialization timelines. And I started off in the dairy desk, if you will, and really around cheeses and yogurts and ice cream. And the ice cream was awesome. And I loved it because my wife and I had a lot to talk about. She had Unilever ice cream. She's like a dairy scientist, right? So we had a lot to talk about. Remember, my greatest achievement was a strawberry and balsamic syrup swirled ice cream that we sold to restaurants. So that was quite fun. Got to build the culinary side, the food science side. And then there was an opportunity to shift to a new desk, which was the meat desk. And everyone was like, oh, that's frightening.
That's a big switch.
It is. I was like, okay, potentially USDA and dairy and animals and meat, right? So, okay, go to like harvesting and fabrication and then all the way through like deli meats and RTE items and fermented dry cured meats and all that. And that was like, to me, was the coolest job I think I'd had working on those items. It really spoke to me. One, because not everyone can handle it. You walk into some of those plants and you're like, I don't know if this is for me, right? And I remember the first time I saw, like they call it an evisceration, right? There was a USDA. They're like, well, if anyone feels it needs to leave, and I like felt nothing, and I was like, am I a sociopath? Like, what's wrong with me? And I was like, okay, can I do it? They were like, no, but you're in. So it was quite fun. I mean, you have to understand how the sausage is made before you can make different types of sausage. So I didn't really do that all the time, the eviscerations and harvesting, but I was aware of it because there's science involved, right? So you mentioned moisture retention and being driven by pH and ions. Well, what happens when you're stressed out and you tense up and there's lactic acid? Well, now the pH of your muscles change. Now your moisture retention's off. So taking that and translating it into products that U.S. Foods would sell, whether it was raw stuff or deli meats, it was really cool. The science was. And not only that, the culture in the meat world was like the culinary world. It was like,
it's very different.
Oh, well, the people though, the culture, I was like, oh, these are the same people. It was like the knives and the social fits, and I was like, whoa, I've seen this movie. And it felt natural, and I was able to like make a lot of good partners and a lot of connections higher up. I'm still friends with a lot of them. Sharon Beals and Paul Hoffman. I really like them. They were both on the quality side, but they taught me what was up, and I really enjoyed learning from them in the meat world.
I'm still laughing at the part where you thought you were a sociopath because you because I got a small little story for you. Yeah. I know you're on a roll, but
no, go for it.
When I was a child, like I'm going to say 10. No, maybe I was even younger than that. Maybe it was more like, I was probably 10. My mother was the den mother for my brother's Boy Scouts.
Okay.
And you go on field trips. She took them to a butcher, where they slaughtered their own cows. And she has to take me and my younger sister. And we walk in and the guy goes, oh, you're late. We'd already shot the cow. So we already cut its head off.
Right.
And so we're sitting there and we're kids. We're standing on the second floor of like a balcony down looking at the slaughter floor, and they're slaughtering this cow. We walk through all these past all these cow heads hung on hooks, and this is normal.
Yep.
And we didn't even bat an eye. Now, I'm not sure I want to see that now. I'm sure that would be entertaining to me, but I laugh when people get all weirded out by this. I'm thinking, yeah, my mom took us on a tour. This was our field trip to go watch a cow get slaughtered.
I know that's quite wild, especially for that age group, but I'm sure one or two of them were like, yeah. And that probably triggered
the kids loved
in
it.
their brains for career trajectory. You never know what's going to be inspiring, but if it was me in that Cub Scout group, it would have probably worked, So
hey, we loved it. So go on. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay. That's good ad lib. I'm like, I wish I was actually one of those kids. So that's fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
I was just,
they wouldn't allow that now.
No, I didn't do anything. I was just like throwing oranges at cars in Florida. That's how I grew up, like that.
Yeah. But they wouldn't allow that now. You couldn't take a Cub Scout and watch animals get slaughtered.
Yeah, that's also an HR nightmare on the company side. So yeah, no. Things you could have done, right? I remember you used to be able to smoke cigarettes in a Waffle House. So,
Yeah.
And I did.
On airplanes.
So yeah, exactly. So, okay. Maybe we're for the better now,
I don't know.
But
we'll see.
I loved that in the meat components. But there was, I never worked in confections, was not looking to leave really. I think there were maybe some cultural components at the company itself that were allowing me the curiosity to pick up the phone when it rang. Cause I loved the meat and I loved what I was doing and I loved the team and my team. But there were some things that I think I was like, okay, is that the phone ring? And let me hear what it is. And it was for a candy company. And I was like, no way, hard no. I was like, that's where I draw the line. I've been interested in different opportunities. So if you notice the way I've gone through different industries in CPG was how I did it in culinary, was different culinary cuisines, right? And I would find them all to learn that way. I was doing the same in the industry with the different categories. And I was like, candy, I was like, nah, the connection with what? Gelatin, gummies, like maybe that's the connection. And it was a hard sell. I talked to the recruiter again. So I was in Chicago for US Foods. This was another Chicago job. This was Ferrara Candy Company that was calling me. Mm-hmm. And it was probably a couple weeks of him just like chipping away and really it took a lot. I was not convinced, but there were some components to the job that were interesting, like international. So I've been working with U.S. consumers, and it's always, we want more chocolate, we want more salt, we want more sugar. Regulatory is pretty predictable, right? Because I live here. But the consumers and the components with international plus the travel was interesting. Mm-hmm. And I sat down with I believe she was the VP of R&D. She's now the Chief Innovation Officer. And until my time there, that's who I reported to. She was from Kraft. She was like 15 years there. My wife had at one point ended for 7 years worked at Kraft. So a lot of connection points with who I was speaking with interview-wise. And her reputation was solid. I mean, she was like, before I even sat down, I was like, I'm going to like her. But I'm probably going to like this job as a result. I think we talked for about an hour and a half. And I walked out of that room and oak broke. And I was like, I'm taking this job. I like her.
Wow.
Her vision. I like it's gonna, like, I'm clearly maturing in my career path. And I'm like, okay, I'm buying into the boss. I'm buying into the plan. She had been on for 7 months from Kraft and 15 years ago before that. So I'm like, I like what's happening here. I met some of the other stakeholders at the company. I was like, okay, this is not going to be the Ferrara I see. Ferrara's doing this, right? And I'm like, that's exciting. International is exciting. There was an acquisition with Ferrero, the owner of Ferrero, purchasing Ferrara. And around that time, it was like, hey, we've got a senior manager job. We got two. One's for every day. One's for this international and the Ferrero side. And we're not really sure what it means. And do you want that one? And I was like, I'll take that one. They're like, good, just go figure out what that means. It's kind of how my orientation and onboarding was go figure this out, right? And I just kind of jumped into it with both feet, and managing some of the relationship with Ferrero and the R&D projects, personalities, time zones. It led me to eventually, after a couple of years, finding my position being elevated to director and leading international for Ferrara, plus we'll call it, at the time it was called Global Brands Projects or Special Projects. That was all the Ferrero stuff. So I led that. I led international, and then I led vitamins and minerals, which was basically a co-man business at Ferraro. So it was quite busy, but I was on different time zones. I had a team that I had aligned versus the different business units. It was exciting. And I was content. I mean, I was almost 5 years there. I have a picture on the wall here that everyone signed. I clearly left, but I was scared to death when I left.
Well, what kind of candy did you work on when you were there?
So some of it is going to be launching. It was in partnership with Ferrero, so I can't actually divulge. But what did just launch was the Wonka candy. So did you see the Wonka had gummies that were filled with juice?
No.
There was the Wonka movie that just launched. And if you go into any movie theater in the USA or any Walmart, there are Wonka displays. It's I forget the Pantone color, but there were 4 different colors, 4 different flavors. CIS, if you're familiar, is center and shell technology. So a gelatin shell with a pectin center. And each of the shells was a little top hat. And they dyed your tongue blue. And my kids have been eating them for years through the development process. So that's when I can talk about that launch. And that was fun. It was a heavy collaboration with the Ferrero team. We've actually bonded. I'm friends with them now, even though I'm not there. The colleagues I met at Ferrero, I see as lifetime friends. Trauma bonded. We're tight. But that launch, that was exciting. And then just, typical stuff. I can't mention the customers on the co-packing side for VMS, but if you've been to Target, you've probably seen it. Let's do that. So it was a lot of managing that business from an R&D perspective. It was a lot of times, and something that Chris Cluno told me is that you can work 10 years in R&D and never launch product. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And it happens. And I've been fortunate to have a lot of opportunities to launch a lot of products, through the different companies I've been at. Some successful, some flops. Teams we went and failed together. I wouldn't say it's all my fault, but some things have failed. I think the things that are still in market are the Duncan Hines Deluxe and some of the indulgents as well, the brownies. I think all the frostings I made are gone. That's a good thing. But you work for your career and you're lucky to launch some items. And I was able to work on a lot of stuff at Ferrara, but really the big thing, because we work on it for 3 years and the P&L doesn't work, right? Or the marketing campaigns and A&P don't add up, or whatever the reason is, right? We've been able...
It could just be the timing's wrong.
That could be it as well. I mean, in the Wonka, to be candid, the Wonka project died 3 times. Came back slightly different each time. I wasn't convinced it actually launched, but here we are. So, it's just luck of the draw.
I don't think people realize how long it takes to put a product together. I did a podcast. It's going to come out probably next 2 weeks with a gentleman, and he worked for McDonald's. And he... Chef Mike is what we call him. And he said, you would work on, this is a simple menu item at McDonald's, for heaven's sakes. And he said 2-3 years in, and it would launch. Or 2-3 years in, and they said, nah, we don't think we're going to do it.
And, well, hopefully he had something to do with the Mambo sauce, because I'm a fan of the Mambo sauce that they LTO'd at McDonald's. But I hear you. Did you not try it? It was here and gone, and I put it on everything. I'm like, sell it in a jar.
Well, he no longer works for McDonald's, so I could go ahead and tell him that I haven't been to McDonald's in 10 years. Oh,
see, I have to go. I'm pointing to my daughters. I think we go on Tuesdays when my wife is teaching Pure Bar, so. Yeah. That's our thing. Happy Meals are a food group in our house, but it's okay. So
yeah, my grandkids like Wendy's for some reason.
Yep.
So that I think it's the Frosties the draw.
Listen, let's be clear. I like Wendy's too. I like all food equally. 3-star Michelin and the barbecue sauce at McDonald's, all the place in my heart. I love them all equally, right? So Wendy's, sign me up. Let's go. I like their chili.
I understand. But, it was great talking to him about all the things. It takes like 65 people to put a product together for McDonald's. I'm like, Seriously.
I mean, that's
you know?
how you know you have what it is, why it takes so long is, and I'm sure you know this, is by the time it hits the market, there's a high level of confidence that stable ROI. I mean, that pretty much encapsulates it right there. So it's going to be stable on shelf. You know, we're not going to have leaking or sailing or color fading. And the business plan, they're going to get a return. That's what they're here for. I mean, that's what we're all here for, right? It's to get a return on our investments, whether it's my time or the products that the company launches. That's the name of the game, right?
Yeah. Now, years ago, I had a gentleman interviewing for a product development position, and he spent the whole interview talking about the 3 products that he had launched. And the company was like, I don't know if we want to hire him if he's only worked on 3 things. And he said, oh, no. He said, I've worked on hundreds of things that never made it to market.
Right.
And they said, well, let's talk about those things. They talked about those things for a couple hours, and he got the job.
Hey, you get the job?
But,
perfect.
He got the job. But it was like, he thought they only wanted to hear about his success.
Right.
But the other products were successes as far as a scientist goes. They were just not approved by marketing, approved by whoever.
Well, I tell my team, I think the failures are learning situations that should be equally celebrated, right? I mean, it's all about how you handle the failure, but that's what builds the person. I mean, my failures have built me. I have failed a lot, and that's what got me here. I mean, it gives me a bit of a tough skin. I learned what, muddy holes not to step in anymore, and it's built me. I mean, that failure, you getting fired at the pizzeria was huge. Sounds minuscule, but not only was it for my pride, but it was like, I learned a lot from it. I grew up very fast at that moment, right? I've failed, just by screwing up on projects at the corporate level and having to, make up for mistakes or putting in the wrong specs, wrong shelf life. And you've got $100,000 worth of materials on the line. And that's probably, I mean, even today, it's been a tough day for me. There's been it's just tough in the environment. I think it's all about learning from your mistakes. You're supposed to make them, and when I go back to Chris Puno, he gave me a long enough leash that I was able to find my mistakes. And I do the same with my team. My management style now, because I'm not necessarily in the technical components as much. My team is, but I lead them in a way that I want them to be technical leaders and fail, but learn from their failures and know from them. And how can we use that as a learning point for us? So, I think it's good. I think it's good to fail, right? And I think even my daughters, they fail. They don't know what that's like, and they hate it, and they think it's the end of the world. But it's good. It's good.
Some of the failures, I'm sure that they become a success. Like, have you ever made something you were like, we shouldn't have tried this, but boy, that's delicious. This is great.
I think that's, I've heard of other colleagues' products coming up that way. I have not been that fortunate, Maureen. Usually if I screw up, it's over. Learn from this, grunts. That's pretty much how it was. But no, I mean, I would say that, like, I could turn lemons to lemonade if we're looking at, like, oh God, this new product, the scrap rates are through the roof and this is going to kill the project. But then coming up with a way to utilize the scrap rates into a profit for the company, like, that's way to squeak out a W from an L, right, if you will. So, that's probably a happy ending in a tense situation that you didn't see coming, So
are you going to bring us up to how did you get your job at MrBeast Feastables?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, it was culture is important for me, and I did not want to let my team down. I mean, when I announced, there were tears, and it was sad. And I'm still friends with them. I see them as partners and trusted allies, right? It's not like I'm a peer and you do as I say. Like, we're on the same team in all senses of that, right? So it was a tough decision, and I got a call. It was, again, cultural pressures and I would say things that were happening that were well outside of my control allowed me to hear the phone ring and go, I wonder who's on the other line, right? And after many years, I was like, let me hear what's out there. And a phone call, it was a call for this company I'm at now, Feastables, and I was like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it is. I thought I was getting pumped, right? They were pitching me, and I was like, great. I also don't need car insurance. I'm solid, right? And it took them a minute, and I thought about it, and I was like, I don't know. And they said, well, how about you just marinate on it, and we'll call you back in a couple of days, right? And it was a recruiter that I'd known for over a decade, right? Never done business with them. This is just part of your network, is your greatest strength, right? It's like, I don't like to make enemies. I like to have a good network. I'd like to, if they call me, I'll give them the time of day. And some of them I'm actually friends with, right? So this was just, a regular call in, like, hey, it's been a while. How the kids, how things going? Got this thing, and I was like, that sounds fake. Thanks, and it was a couple of days, and I thought about it. I did some search.
Did you know what MrBeast was?
I'm 41 years old, Maureen. So I don't get out much. Let's put it that way, right? I asked my kids, and their brains melted. And we have about 22 kids on our street, so I was just like, hey, and they were like, what do you got? So I was intrigued, and.
Yeah, I did not know what it was at all. My son had to tell me.
Yep.
And when he told me about it, I was like, this is dumb. Like, like, first of all, the name, and then you have these, candy. Right. And it just pops out of nowhere. Right. This doesn't happen. This is not normal.
Well, I think it's a lot of, it's probably a new wave of doing business, and I think a lot of people will see a different approach here. Now, I'm going to be very careful in what I'm saying here, because I don't want to speak on his behalf or Feastables' behalf. Right. But I'm okay talking to it to some extent. But I think what is new is that typical companies, the big ones, have been around for some of them over 100 years, right? And the way that they go to market is, it's a cadence. It's a da-da-da-da-da-da. ROI is there, we're good, right? And then part of that is the A&P, right? And they're going to dump a lot of A&P into the product. That's like the marketing, right? And some of that's built in or amortized into the product cost itself, right? So when you look at this new age, like I wouldn't know where to start if, like, my wife and I decided we would start seeing other people. It's like all this new technology and dating and YouTube and TikTok and all this stuff. Right. I'm good, right? I don't know any of it. I think what is very clear is that there are more ways to market than these other companies have realized, right? And I think you can't shake a leg or deny the gravitational pull that some of these people have. And I think that it's a new way of competing in market that a lot of people aren't going to be ready for. I think it's going to catch a lot of people off guard, which is interesting.
And I took some time to go and see what MrBeast was. And now I feel like a 10-year-old. I can't stop watching. I need to stop watching.
Well, my goal is to make products that people love. I mean, that's what got me started.
Oh, yeah.
As a chef, even, you want to make something, you watch them eat it, and you're like satisfied. When I have my neighbors over, which is pretty frequent, and I feed them because everyone comes over for food. I like watching them eat it, and it's the same for products, right? I heard Monica on your podcast, and she said it's the same thing. My wife said, you launch a product, you're doing the product selfie. Everybody does it. It's like you're proud. Yep. And I love watching other people buy it at the store, right? So when I'm working on new products, and even at my current job, I want to make it excellent. I want to rock people's socks off. I want my team to have the same focus, obsessed with the product, obsessed with pushing the needle, pushing the boundaries, making stuff that people haven't seen before. And so I think we're, combining a lot of the right things to really make some waves in the market.
I've always said that, when I started out in recruiting, I recruited all different kinds of industries: paint, chemicals, cosmetics. I did not know that. Okay. Oh, all those different ones. This is a long time ago. And the people in the food industry would talk to me. The people in the paint and chemicals would hang up on me. Yeah. I mean, no, not even nicely. It was like, You'd say, introduce yourself, I'm a recruiter. And they would like slam. And I was getting my, you have to have thick skin to be a recruiter, first of all, but I was just dying. These people are not nice.
That's
I want
hard.
nice people.
Yeah.
So I started talking to more and more food industry people, and then that's where my niche ended up being.
Good.
Because they were nice. But I realized that when you spend your whole workday trying to make a product that makes people happy, you can't help but be a happy people. Because you're not trying. I mean, I realize there's products out there in the food industry make you healthier, make you feel better, but you still want it to taste good, so they're happy to eat it,
Yep.
happy to drink it. They want to buy it, makes their children happy. And so I gravitated to the food industry. And I will be honest with you, if I'd heard of food science, I mean, I think it's really brave that you started over. You already down that route of culinary.
I didn't have a choice.
I know, but you could have done something else. You could have gone to culinary school and tried to be a better, chef.
Which would have probably been the past. You're right. Yep.
Yeah. And so I was out of college, I don't know, 4 years when I heard of food science as a recruiter. And I thought, if I only had known about this, I would have gone to school. It never crossed my mind to just stop and go back to school. I don't think I had it in me. I had no money,
Right.
Things like that. I was already on this path. So I stayed here and have been a recruiter for over 30 years in the food industry.
Right.
But I still live vicariously through everybody, because you have travel, you have happy products, you have friends. Like you talk about networking, you guys all make friends within the industry.
Oh yeah.
And keep in touch with those people. And so I was always a little bit jealous of that and wish I had, like I said, found this. And I'm glad that you found it. So, Davis, let's talk about chocolate specifically. Many people don't actually know where and how we get chocolate. Now, I was on vacation in October. I went to Costa Rica. And that one of the big deals in Costa Rica is to go on a tour of a cocoa farm. And actually, this was like a little cocoa farm. And they told us that they actually grow all the cocoa beans at a higher elevation. So this was just for touring reasons. So we got to go in, and see everything. So have you been to a cocoa bean farm?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the thrills of working in the chocolate industry, is seeing, how the sausage is made, so to speak. And to me, it's fascinating. I love that we're comparing stories here, because my understanding now, I haven't been to every cocoa farm and every climate on the planet. So my experiences are really narrow, but I am aware of what goes on in general in the industry. And, imagine just follow the equator, right? The equator across the middle of the planet, plus or minus on each side. That's going to be kind of your cocoa band, if you will, right? So anywhere from Vietnam to India to Central and West Africa to Ecuador, parts of South America, that band is kind of the cocoa band. And as you mentioned, with climates, temperatures, elevations, soils, even amounts of rainfall, all of these things factor into the end product, or like a different flavored nuance within a bean, right? And the secret is finding the right blends and being able to create, I would equate it to wine, right? A lot of people probably are more familiar with wine than maybe the agricultural components of cocoa, right? Although they're very similar, people are probably, there's been movies like Sideways. I'm probably dating myself, but that was a movie on wine. And it's all about, you could theoretically have the same grapes in California as you do in Italy. And because of the soils and the climates, they taste different, right? And it's very similar with cocoa beans, right? So if you grow them in different areas, they're just going to have different nuances, meaning the end product will be different. And I love that you went on a tour of the farm when you were in Costa Rica. I bet that was pretty cool. I think for me, there's a couple of like key moments in my career that like I don't think I'll ever forget. And one of them was going to a farm and hacking open a cocoa pod. It looked, the first time I saw it, I knew what they looked like, because I've seen it all over the internet, seen it in books, seen it in presentations, but wasn't really prepared to like see it in real life. And it, it was a very slanted slope on the side of, it's not really a mountain, but it wasn't really a hill. I don't know what I would categorize it as, but it was rough terrain to some degree. And, there's spent cocoa pods all over the ground. So clearly they open the pods and use them as fertilizer, circle of life type deal. But that one of those key moments was cracking it open and eating the white stuff. So whether you call it...
Oh, you mean, I thought it was cracking it open and it looks like brains.
Right. It really depends on the cracker or who's doing it, right? So you get waist or head to toe. But it's the mucilage or the pulp, or as they call it, the baba. I don't know what they call it in Costa Rica. But to me,
they called it brains.
They call it brains. I mean, worse, right?
They said, looks like brains. Here's the brains.
Yeah. I've had brains before. It does not taste like it, right? What was your experience when you ate it? Right, like the baba the first time, or
it tastes like fruit, like orange, lemons, cherry fruit. Those kind of fruits.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what species they had there. But my fruits were different, right? So talking about climates and soil, you got, like you said, citrus and cherries. Mm-hmm. I got more like banana and mango in mine, like very strongly, very pronounced. It was like vanilla banana, vanilla mango. So like tropical fruits. And it's not because I'm in like a tropical climate. These are just different species. There's typically the 3 big species and hybrids within, and then climates, right? So it just shows that you can have arguably the same species in 2 different countries, 2 different climates, and get very different nuances. And that, to me, as a food scientist, spoke to me. It's like, one, I'll never forget that texture and flavor. I'm a texture person. And I was like, how do I bottle this up and sell this to everyone on the planet, right? That was my first reaction. But my second reaction was like, there's a lot of nuances that can be controlled at this stage of the cocoa industry, right? So not just adding in flavors and different amounts of sugar, but really how you grow it, the climate, and then what species you're blending within those, right? Because you can use all of one species, or you can use 5 and blend them at different ratios, and you really get some unique characteristics and flavors further on down the line in processing.
Yeah, but I didn't like the texture.
What?
And I'd
have to go, Marie. This isn't going to work.
It was slimy, and it was a little slippery, and no, I didn't like that at all.
Oh my gosh.
It didn't dissolve in your mouth. It just kind of stayed there. It didn't, not like it was you were eating something that dissolved.
Sure.
But
well, do you like mochi? That maybe will be my only side question. Do you like mochi? Have you had mochi? It's like pounded rice starch. It's very gelatinous. So to me, it would be like closer from like a texture standpoint. I love mochi though. I love the textures. So to me, I was never
had mochi. What is mochi? What do you eat it with? What is it?
It's typically like a pounded rice starch, and it finds itself in more of sweet applications. Next time you're at the store, you can usually, there's Americanized versions. You find them in the frozen section. Like little mochi balls with papaya pulp on the inside, or typically like Asian flavors. But it's really a texture component. I would highly recommend.
Telling me,
but you don't sound like you would like the texture if you don't like the baba. So it's an experience. Maybe we'll walk you back to the side of texture with,
Yeah, maybe. But the white part, the brain part, the baba part, you don't use that to make chocolate, right?
No, unfortunately. And I was fascinated because a lot of that is just, there's a lot of components to that pulp, but you think about the shelf life of that is not existent, right? So imagine if they, meaning companies and farmers, were going to collaborate on a way to leverage that, the supply chain would be cost prohibitive, right? I would imagine there's temperature controls, micro controls, all of the above that, and the quantity, right? You're not getting a ton of it per pod. So I think it's unfortunate that you really only get to experience it when you're there, and then it's gone, right? And I've heard, there was a lot of discussion about this when I was there, because obviously interested in like, how are they grafting and what are they doing with the pulp, and how about sustainability components? There are a lot of things that were interesting conversations. And they were saying that there are some local brewers that were using the baba or the mucilage. It's like a post, filtration kind of flavor add to some of the IPAs locally, which sounded interesting. Because to me, I was getting tropical fruits, bananas and mangoes. I was thinking IPAs and the texture. I was like, okay, where's this brewery? But I think outside of that, it just goes into, part of the process, either the soil or it's used in the fermentation process, right? Because they take grains out, if you will, collect them, and then they ferment them on site and then dry them on site, typically, right? And there's moisture in there, and that just helps and aids in the fermentation process. And then it's gone.
I was expecting, because I know that cocoa without sugar and without cream or anything like that tastes like mole sauce, like dirt to me.
Yes.
So
dirt. Yes.
So when I tasted it, and I was like, "Oh, this is sweet. This is weird. This is sweet, but the cocoa bean's not."
Right.
So you go right into the cocoa bean and the fermentation. So
Right.
talk to us a little bit about what the next step is in the after you take it out of the pods.
Sure. So can't speak for all farms, right? But my experience is, excuse me, there's been clearly there's a lot of collaboration between farmers and the supply chains and the companies that procure these items, because you want to ensure that there's continuity, food safety, SOPs in place for having the same raw material, if you will, at processing. So I was noticing that there, at some point there's a bit of call it street knowledge with how they're capturing and fermenting and the way they're doing it and the equipment they're using. But the further you go into the process, the more rigid and defined the process gets, right? For controls and safety and consistency. So really, they're they're collecting the pods 20 feet away. They're putting it all in boxes or buckets. And a lot of times they're just put in these areas with banana leaves and left to ferment for X amount of time. And after the fermentation process is done, there's a change in the cocoa pod as it is, and then they let it dry, typically in a yard, obviously covered, and let it dry till they hit a certain water activity. And it's funny, I was asking the scientists in me, how are you measuring this? And they're like, oh, we just kind of look at it and snap. I mean, there's a lot of like tribal knowledge on how to process, right? The same way you work in a manufacturing plant. Someone can hear that machine. They're like, I know what that sound is. Let's change. They had a lot of like tribal knowledge on what they're looking for, because at the end of the day, they're selling this to the company, and the company has rigid protocols in place to make sure that they're getting, right level of fermentation, right levels of water activity. So they're not, tainting the mass of cocoa beans or cocoa nibs with bad products. So it was fun to watch them go from fermentation to drying to then capturing. And a lot of the companies, my understanding, the good ones that work with the farmers, will take over the supply chain at that point. Because you imagine they're somewhere in a climate, somewhere rugged terrain, potentially out in underdeveloped areas like a forest or rainforest, right? How do they get the beans to the processing facilities, right? So there's a big partnership from what I've seen with the companies that will then procure those ingredients. They'll go to them wherever they are and pick them up. And I thought that was a pretty cool partnership. So, technically not part of a company, the farmers, but very much in collaboration, support systems in place. That seems to be pretty consistent throughout the industry, right? There's just I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back kind of mentality, which I really enjoyed seeing.
The guy who was doing this for us, he took it all the way through. They showed the boxes they fermented everything in and how many steps and the whole bit. And then they had the nibs there. And he asked everybody, he said, so if I grind these nibs, what do they become? And I'm like, oh, this is easy, and everybody in the group says powder. And I'm like, no. I said, it becomes paste. And he said, yeah, because I knew that it doesn't become drier. Those cocoa beans have an oil or whatever. They have a moisture in them, and so they become a cocoa butter.
Almonds and peanuts, right? Very similar.
Yep. Yeah, they don't become powder, except on the market you see all this peanut butter powder, and I'm always skeptical looking at it. How do you make peanut butter powder? Because if you powder peanuts, they don't become powder. So I haven't figured that one out.
It grows on trees like that, Maureen, right? It's an apple.
Oh.
But it's, you're keyed into exactly that, right? Once you grind it up, you change the particle size. It's essentially that. What did they call it when you were there? That's cocoa liquor, right? Is what they're grinding it up in.
He actually said cocoa butter, cocoa liquor. He was using different terms. And I think he was so used to Americans, and he's been to America enough times. He's like, well, I'll speak your language. You don't have to speak ours.
Sure. Well, cocoa butter, for all intents and purposes, once it's refined, that's the fat component that you were mentioning, right?
Yeah.
That's benign. It's just a fat. Call it a seed oil, if you will, because it's technically a seed. It's benign once it's been refined. So the cocoa liquor itself will consist of the cocoa solids, cocoa powder, and the cocoa butter. And you can separate those, or you can sell that as a commodity within itself, right? So sometimes, depending on the company or the scope of the project, if you will, if I'm getting granular, right? There's different ways that you can find yourself working within the chocolate industry. One of those is procuring it as a raw material at that stage, right? So blended with the solids and the butter, comes in a block or a chip or a wafer, and you buy that in bulk and melt it down, and you can conch it. Conching meaning further refining and temperature. Imagine you're grinding, creating friction and temperature over time. That helps release a lot of the flavonoids, maintains a really smooth texture, and will ultimately walk us towards a better textured snap or tempered chocolate in the end. But you can purchase it at that point and really start adding in steps in your process, other sugars and flavors to make it your own signature blend, if you will.
They made a drink for us, which would be like a hot cocoa.
Okay.
And then, of course, they made the most delicious chocolate sauce in the world and let us dip everything in it. They had fruit and cookies and all kinds of stuff for us to try. And I would say it was better than anything I've ever tasted, and they made it right there. So
drink it of gods, right? Is what I think it was originally.
I think that's what they called it. Yeah. They referred to it that way.
Well, please tell me that there was some alcohol in that drink somewhere. Okay. So
what they did was, and I don't know why I can't remember, I have to go back and look at pictures, but they did sugar cane too.
Ooh.
Because they said they don't do refined sugar in any of their products. They do, they use the sugar cane that they grow.
Okay.
So they had a grinder there. They made the guys do it. They thought it'd be funny.
They were pressing the cane there and getting the juice out.
Yeah, they had the press there, and they had normally you have horses run around or donkeys, or they had the guys do it. They thought it'd be silly, to embarrass the guys. So they had the sugar cane, and they made us a drink, an alcoholic drink, and it was really, really good.
Wow.
But now that I think about it, I wonder if it was out of that Bubba stuff that out of the brains.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might have done that. I think that's what they did.
Wait, it's wild. Yeah. I'm gonna have to, after this, I'm gonna have to get your notes because it sounds like a fun vacation just for me and my wife, right? So
it was great. We went with a whole bunch of people and we stayed in a house and we got attacked by monkeys and
that was sign me up. I mean, everything you're saying sounds like it's perfect. So
I will tell you, before we left, they said the only thing you have to worry about is monkeys stealing things. So put your stuff away.
Just say.
Because the houses don't have screens
right.
on their window. We didn't even have windows in some parts of the house. And one night, we all went to bed, and it rains every night. And it's so heavy on the tin roofs that you can't hear. When you're in the bedroom, you can't hear anything.
Sure.
And only the bedrooms are air conditioned. So we were in there, and the other people, their room was closer to the action, but evidently 5 or 6 monkeys and some other animals came in the house, came in the kitchen and ransacked it.
Scene from Jumanji, right? So
yes. When we got up, I was like, what? I didn't hear a thing because I can't hear anything from it. But I had gotten up and gone to the bathroom and everything. And
so they
go to the bathroom.
Practice. Sounds like they've done this before, right?
They do it at other houses all the time. But the interesting thing is they will not touch like potato chip bags or foil or plastic, anything that makes that noise. So all the bags of potato chips were fine.
Now I think you're just messing with me at this point.
No, I have videos. I went the next day, 3 showed up and came in, and I went into the bathroom. And when I came out, they were standing outside the door, so I couldn't get out of the bathroom. I had to wait till they left because the white-faced monkeys will bite you.
Oh, wow.
And the other ones will they more like scare you more than you scare them. And so it was not, that part was not interesting.
I'm still in it for this vacation. I think my wife would hear this and she'll pass, but I'm still in it. So this sounds exciting,
Well, if you all you have to do is, how they say with certain bears, not grizzly, but black bears and brown bears, if you just act real big and nasty, they'll leave you alone. Well, we had to do that with these. We had to take pots and pans and bang them and scream at them and yell back. And then they went, okay, we're not coming back. And they never came back again.
Similar approach and philosophy with my kid and her friends as well. So
I don't know about that. Now, you talked about different species of chocolate. Would a company have to source chocolate from different countries to get flavors they want, or could they just go with different species in the same country?
So my understanding is that there are different species and hybrids within different countries, right? So some of the farms that I was experiencing definitely had some of the major species, but then also had multiple varieties. So the same way that you would do farming for any other agricultural product, it's the same. And the farmers like to tinker and play. And some species will do better in this side of the farm or in this climate. So they'll try to expand within that species. And then some are more resistant to certain pesticides or bugs. And a lot of it was organic, right? So they were trying to crossbreed to find species and plants that would thrive in the climate and then be resistant to the localized pests and molds. So there were multiple varieties within. And if I were approaching this as a company, it really depends on the size of the company. Cost is a big factor. Where you're selling it is another factor, meaning if you're going to be selling a chocolate in Europe versus the US versus South America, different flavor profiles, right? So you're going to want to cater your formulas and sourcing to those localized preferences.
Yeah, I don't know about other countries, but Costa Rica was super into everything natural. I don't think you could get them to use pesticides.
Right.
I think they would be like, nope, we don't use them in this country.
Right.
They farmed palm oil. They have palm trees for palm oil.
Or RSPO?
I don't know, but
if they were doing like organic, right, I would assume that they're doing RSPO palm.
Yeah, I don't know. But they had they just farms with straight rows of hundreds of palm trees. And they said they're doing palm oil.
Yep.
And I said, what do you use palm oil for? They said, oh, we don't use palm oil in this country. It's illegal.
Wow.
He said, it's really bad for you.
Wow.
And I said, it's really bad for you? They said, yeah. I said, well, so where do you sell? He goes, United States, Europe.
Sure.
I said, great. And I've seen it listed on food, so obviously that's true. So, Davis, what's the difference between dark chocolate and milk chocolate?
Well, I think you said it right there. I mean, at the high level, it's milk, right? And yes, you can find some darks that have some milk solids in them. But at the end of the day, dark chocolate is going to consist of your cocoa liquor, which is butter and cocoa solids, right? And then sugar. That's going to be your dark, right? And different levels will have, I'm sure you've seen labels of dark chocolate with percents on it. Those percents are talking to the amounts of the cocoa solids. The higher the percent, arguably the more bitter the product will be. That's kind of your profile and range within darks. Now you look at the next level, which is going to be called the Middle America preference, which is milk, and that's very much the same in Europe as well. That's where you have milk or milk solids plus your sugar, plus your cocoa liquor, which will be your butter and your cocoa solids. And sometimes you'll find lecithins added in at this point, or emulsifiers at this point, because now you're adding in other ingredients and potentially a flavor, right? So imagine like vanilla. So if I'm, as a chef, if I'm blending things that go well with chocolate, there's going to be, basics. Coffee and vanilla always enhance and go well with chocolate. So you sometimes find flavors added to milk chocolate as well, just to amplify the product itself. And then there's one more step down, which is tends to skew towards the younger, like my daughter right here loves white chocolate. technically not chocolate, right? It's cocoa butter and milk fats, right? So a product derived from the cocoa process, but no cocoa solids, hence why it's white. So it's really just a sweet candle. It's the way I look at it. But
that is,
my daughter loves it, and it's. I'm less concerned with the fingers on the couch when she eats the white, but those, I mean, to me, those are like the three main buckets. And then you can find, based on your levels, you can find nuances within those buckets, right?
What's the lowest percentage you can have and still be dark chocolate? Do you know?
I've heard conflicting information, and I'm not regulatory, right? So I know that there's a standard of identity, but I'm not as well versed on like the exact percent to like the threshold for dark to milk. And honestly, if we want to edit this part out of the video, I'm like not totally sure. I've heard very conflicting piece of information on that.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to be, no, we're not being super technical. This is just like, I've seen 80 and 70, but is 50 still dark?
Yeah, it is. I think you can have 50 and, really, it's the line is when you start adding the milk and the milk solids, right? So the milk and flavor, to me, that's where people start seeing it go more sweet and milk and creamy versus the bitter dark. I've looked at some of the food laws, and it's been a hot minute since I've looked at some of the regulations and standards of identity, but I know that we do have standards for identity for these items. I'm just not as well versed.
Yeah, I don't think anybody out there buying their chocolate is caring about the laws. They just want to eat it.
Some people definitely do. But yeah.
But I don't like when you get to 70 and 80%. It does taste like a little bit like dirt to me.
No, it does. And I think a lot of people will claim, antioxidants or perceived health benefits, which sure, there's probably higher levels of antioxidants. Is there enough in there in one bar to change your day or your week? Debatable. I think it's in the eye of the beholder, right? At the end of the day, I think chocolate is really, for me, it's not. I'm not eating chocolate for nutritional value. I'm eating it because I want something after that meal that I just crushed. That's really in my freezer, and no one's around, and I'm snapping a piece off, and I'm eating it. And just as long as it's not super high percent cocoa and bitter, and not white chocolate, so within the middle, I'm gonna be happy. Right. And it's for me in that moment. And that's what I enjoy. That's why I have chocolate in my house. And that's why I like making it. It's just that moment. Right.
Yeah. I'm the one who goes and gets the chocolate chips out of the Nestle bag.
Okay. There you go.
Because I'm like, there's no chocolate in the house. We have to have something. And,
right.
So you go open a bag of those and don't let anybody know. You just keep resealing it until the bag's like got this much in it. And you think, somebody's been after it.
It's the weirdest thing. I my daughter, the 5-year-old, again, I keep talking to her. She is our chocolate fiend. My other daughter is more of a gummy and lollipops fan. So sugar and no cocoa. But she will beg for a bowl of, mini chips or mini, she just wants to like handful of chocolate in her mouth. She's okay with bars. She's okay with chocolate milk, hot chocolate. She's also okay with a bowl of just chocolate chips, which blows my mind.
Never thought of that. I could try that. So being such a new company and coming out with new products, so you don't have a luxury of time. I mean, so, I know that we talked previously that some companies will take 2-3 years to bring out a new product.
Sure.
And, 2-3 years, if you wait 2 or 3 years to come out with a new product, you aren't even a company anymore because you can't do that. You've got to hit the ground running. So explain how long a company like maybe a Hershey might take to develop a new candy, and then how long a small entrepreneur company can do it, and maybe what things they can do faster and better than a big company.
Sure. That's a really good question, right? I've talked about this several times when I've spoken to students in school or graduates or people early on in their career. And then that's really the difference between small, medium, and large companies. And whether it's specifically a chocolate company or just a CPG company in general, the go-to-market or the route to market, whether you call it the RTM or GTM, is typically the same. Those bigger companies over time will have trial and error processes to have high confidence at the end of the day. So when they know something goes to market, high confidence and return on investment. Consumers will receive it very well. It's going to be a hit, so that when they spend their internal resources, there's going to be something coming back, right? Because at the end of the day, the goal is to be profitable. Sell something great that consumers want, make money for the company. That's what capitalism is, right? Smaller companies have a slightly different approach. And, if you're a food scientist or a developer just getting out of college, you have to think through what kind of company you want, because some of those processes don't exist, right? So imagine a small company. Stage-gate is kind of the golden standard for, route to market, connecting different business functions, making sure that ROI is there, and we're going to launch and this is going to kill it, right? What's funny is that smaller companies, their origin stories aren't based in a stage-gate process, right? That doesn't exist. Sometimes people don't even know what that is. So origin stories for smaller companies are based around a product that just takes off, or an idea that just is light, right? Nowhere in there is anyone talking about processes or stage-gate or anything like that, right? It's more so around, we got something that people want. And, once you find that, you find your way to market. Okay, what's next, right? Can we do other items? And the way that it's been done is sometimes there's a bit of wait and see, or launch and iterate. And there's a tolerance to play within the market. I think the strategies are a bit different for the marketing and the items and the formulations. I think speed is a key component as well when you look at smaller companies. So for me, when you look at it, it's a bit more fun. Bigger CPG companies are very rigid in the process by design to ensure ROI and confidence in launches. And the smaller companies, you can play around a little more to get some really exciting things out there, because you imagine, I've worked on products over a decade, right? And I've had good ideas, and they're DOA, or dead on arrival, because the line on that one plant can't do that, or we're 2 pennies too high and we just can't afford it, right? And those are like, they live and die on the edge of a razor for margins and throughputs and scrap rates. Like, these things they've been designed to perfection for decades. And that doesn't necessarily exist on the smaller companies, right? So those 2 pennies may be overlooked, right? Line, maybe that's not the right manufacturing plant, right? So there's creative solutions that come to play when you look at the smaller companies, and you can find creative solutions at the bigger companies. But I think it's just culturally different, and a bit more, you have a lot of people with creative and fast intentions, and you want to get things to market and push the envelope for creativity and innovation, and creativity on ways to market as well. So I think not necessarily having the process is both a good thing and a bad thing. But when you look at people coming out of school, you just have to say, okay, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a lot of processes and, that war drum's going to beat every 5 seconds, you're going to get something to market? Or do you want something that's like death metal, right? It's the way I would see it. And death metal is like that's the smaller company kind of culture for route to. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm a bit on it, a bit of a tangent, but to me it was, there were some analogies in my head between the drum beats and death metal. But
I think that, bigger companies come up with like 20 ideas and spend a long time analyzing them all to come down to one. And smaller companies go, look, we got 3 good ideas. Let's do them.
Sure.
And the market will tell us which one's good, or the market will tell us all 3 are good, Right. So instead of, we're going to analyze this to death,
Yep.
And I remember years ago, I used to recruit for Smuckers. Okay. And they had bought P&G, several P&G, Crisco, the coffee, the, I think it was coffee, Crisco. I don't know what else it was. But P&G analyzed everything to death, not 2 years, 3 years. We're talking 10, 20 years.
Right.
And Smuckers was kind of like, oh, I think we should come up with tomato jelly. All right, let's go out and do that tomorrow. So these 2 companies had to come together and figure out how to work, because One was around the water cooler. Whoever thought it was a great idea did it. And the other one was like, it doesn't matter how good of an idea it is. We're going to, just run this to death.
Right.
So that was interesting when I talked to employees that, from either side going, now I have to analyze stuff. This is terrible. And the other company going, I can't believe that we're going to actually come out with a product in 6 months. That's unheard of.
I think analysis paralysis is what you're talking about. And
oh, yeah.
It's a terrible disease that really cripples a lot of processes and companies and teams. Sometimes it's necessary, but I think what I've found with it being successful, right, is that you're going to, when they're analyzing, you're trying to find other data points and proxies and like translate it to current situations to then predict success, right? And if you're creating something truly unique, there aren't data points out there or proxies necessarily that you can use. So that may scare a bigger CPG company because that confidence, there's risk in the unknown, there's blind spots, right? I think the smaller companies are a bit more maverick and willing to invest in their gut feeling in some of those areas. So to your point, the tomato jam, right? There's not a huge market for tomato jam. I like tomato jam. Who's to say it's not going to be a smashing success, right? At some point, I know. Doorbells with cameras on them weren't a thing. And everybody was like, what are you talking about, right? And now, everybody has one, right? So
that's right.
At some point, there was a startup, and they took that leap of faith, and here we are, right? I think that's kind of the delta, but that's just how things are. And then at some point, those companies become, very big and very successful.
They do, and then somebody else buys them. So, what different ways can a chocolate company make candy bars?
Well, that's a big question, Marie. I think that there's a lot of different ways, right? And you look at, so being in the confection space, there's really two channels, right? Or two roads that you take. One's non-chocolate confections, the other one's chocolate. And within chocolate, we talked earlier about the dark and the milk and the white. And within there's nuances. And then there's also formats, right? And for me, what I see as being kind of the king here, and we also talked about this earlier, was texture, right? And I think texture, aside from format and flavor, texture to me is king. I think that a lot of people, specifically in the U.S., whether or not they directly recognize that, really texture speaks towards product success in my mind. So that can show its face in different ways with inclusions or fillings or lack of fillings, adding sugar shells. There's a lot of different ways to add texture. And I think that's really kind of the future for a lot of chocolate right now. You imagine chocolate in bars, chocolate in bar tablets, chocolate in cups, chocolate in little, call it poppables or items that you can eat multiple in a theater box at the movie theater, right? Those formats are relatively there. You can fill them, you can coat them in sugar. I think the way that companies are going to be innovating in the future is probably around textures and coatings and fillings. And you can see a lot of that in the market right now. If you just walk down the aisle, a lot of the OG chocolate companies seem to be really double clicking or expanding within their core portfolios around textures and flavor nuances, but certainly in textures.
Now there's I could make chocolate bars if I wanted to skip all the cocoa farm stuff. I could go to a Barry Callebaut, a Blomers, and say, make me some chocolate, and then I could take it from there and make chocolate bars. Or I could take it from all the way at the origin of the chocolate, all the way to my chocolate bar.
You could. And I think there's something to be said there, right? And that's about, it depends on your company, your structure, what you're searching for from a sustainability standpoint. There are companies out there that are creating really ethically sourced, sustainable chocolates, and there are others that are delivering just great flavor. It really depends on the business model of the chocolate. Depends on the size of the company. I can say that if you're going to go out and say, I'm going to make bean to bar chocolate, that's a really tall ask. That's tough, right? Because one, a lot of the big boys that you just mentioned, like the Blommer and the Barry Callebaut's, they're already at those farms and they're already pulling those beans and they already have their procedures in place. So to be able to kind of muscle yourself in as a little guy and find a farm that's willing to sell you some of their beans, how do you process that? It's not the farm's thing, right? It's typically one of the big guys again, right? So how do you find your identity as a smaller company, trying to have something that's bean to bar, ethically sourced? That's incredibly difficult. Not impossible. There are some companies out there doing it. But I am seeing that some of those companies, for the greater good, tend to be leveraging supply chains and sourcing so that everyone can share in the ethics or sustainably sourced cocoa. Because I think it's important, right? It's good for the planet. It's good for all of us. We're all here living the same dream on the same planet. So why not source our beans in the same way? If we can all do good, that's great for everyone. But there's also a lot of benefit if you're a smaller company, just knock out the door one of these big guys and saying, hey, here's what I'm looking for. And they have massive teams of R&D and quality and procurement that can tailor make something for you if you were a startup company to deliver something to market that can meet your perceived needs or the consumer needs. So there's multiple ways to cut the pie.
Yeah. And I think you touched on it, the ethically, a lot of people are into that. And I don't think some people understand that with chocolate, coffee, a lot of things that we have to source outside of the United States. We have no choice. We can't make coffee or chocolate in the United States, cocoa beans, or I don't even know if we can farm avocados yet. But for many years, people abused those small farmers in those countries and didn't take care of them. And I know a lot of the cocoa purchasers and the coffee ones do their best to take care of those communities. They dig wells and offer schooling and take care of the family, because you take care of the family, then the farmer will keep working and he'll keep supplying you with the best cocoa beans or the best coffee beans.
Right.
And I think they found out that we'll help you help us instead of we'll abuse you until we've ripped down all the rainforests. And
if we both have beating hearts, we're both humans, right? It's kind of tough to enjoy a sweet treat if you know that the source is creating pain for the farmers, right? Like I don't think, whether or not that's marketed, I think people as human beings want to know that people are generally being treated well. And I think it's not just coffee and cocoa. I mean, there's other industries as well for agriculture. You could look at sugarcane, you could look at palm.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of agriculture that historically it's just been capitalism has just chewed up and spit out some of those farmers. And I think we're seeing a big pivot now towards ethics and sustainability and just, doing the right thing, which is good. And the reason it's selling is because the consumers are using their wallets to voice their opinions, right? I mean, that's really the crux of it. These companies are driven by the bottom line and by profits. And if the consumers don't like what they're doing, they're not going to buy the products. So I think there's a lot of push from the consumers themselves to drive some change in the industries, plural, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of, the internet's widely available. Everyone has a cell phone. You can get a lot of content these days. I think it drives a lot of consumer behavior, which then in turn drives a lot of corporate behavior, if you will. Years ago, working in CPG, and I know you've definitely been in the industry for a while, didn't really see sustainability departments at all, right? And maybe 7 or 8 years ago was the first time I worked at a company where they had like head of sustainability and sustainability functions within the company as a separate business unit. And that to me was cool. I thought it was revolutionary at the time. I was like, well, I want to work here forever. I love this, right? They're giving back and they care about the planet and all of that. But now it seems to be pretty standard, right? For like ingredient packaging. So, and all of that's been driven by just a lot of consumer behavior, and they're getting their information from the internet and cell phones. So I think we're walking towards a good destination collectively, right? Based on those things.
Yeah. Hey, when I first started recruiting, there was only quality assurance. There was no such thing as food safety. Food safety came out 20 years ago.
Sure. Right.
Like it was okay. The food tasted good. It met all the parameters, but nobody worried about it. Was it actually safe to eat? Well, that's a whole different conversation. But anyways, what methods does a candy company, you've been in candy a long time, so what methods does a candy company use to find out what kind of candy is going to appeal to people in the future? How do you decide what's going to be next?
Great question. And honestly, it's not unique to the confection space, right? I think the products are unique to the confection space, but the approach is generally pretty standard, right? And whether or not, we talked about it earlier, stage gate is implemented at a company, you still want to take a bunch of ideas and filter them down, right? So that you have 1 or 3 or 5, however the strategy comes to play, ideas that you can then get in front of consumers. And that more or less consists throughout the industry, probably other industries as well, right? You want to capture the funnel approach, the open end of the funnel. You can put ideas in from all different types of places, right? Whether it's from Twitter, right? Or direct from the consumers emailing the CEO. I've seen that before.
Oh, really?
You're right. Don't love it because then it makes my next week pretty rough, right? Running around. But, it's okay. You can get ideas from marketing, right? There's a lot of ideas. You get ideas from trends that you see in the food service or restaurant level. My kids have given me ideas, right? My wife gives me ideas. I think, collectively you want to fill the funnel with as many ideas as possible because you're going to start throwing them out pretty quickly, right? There's no way we can make that. Or, you talk about your filters in the funnel. Can we make it? Can we make it at a good cost? Will consumers like it? There are metrics and guardrails within those, but those are generally the filters, right? And anyone, big or small, confections, non-confections, maybe not even in the food industry, they all have a very similar approach of macro ideas and then filtering them out to understand, okay, this one's got legs, or that's there's something about that. I think we should get that in front of consumers, right? I think that approach exists. I like that approach because that allows R&D to be able to come up with ideas, marketing, consumers. A lot of companies will QR code packaging and get direct consumer feedback that way. There's always Twitter or X, if you will, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. There's a lot of easy communication between companies or their reps and consumers. So ideas just flood in quite frequently. And the other thing I don't want to skip out on is that some ideas can come from manufacturing, right? So I think, what was it? Was it Frito-Lay, I think, that owns Cheetos and the spicy Cheetos craze? That was from, I believe, don't quote me, I believe it was from a manufacturing operator.
An employee.
Yeah, idea. And now he's I think, C-level at the company. But that just goes to show that opening into the funnel, you can get ideas from anywhere. And I've worked in jobs where part of the innovation focus was walking the manufacturing plant and looking at scraps and figuring out how we could cross-utilize or utilize scraps that were being sold to farms or really just being disposed of. So that was like a double win, right? But there's so many different ways to come up with ideas that you can get in front of consumers. And then honestly, at the end of the day, you're looking for that consumer appeal. It's really purchase intent, PI, right? And overall liking. Those are kind of the key. Yeah. And when you get it in front of consumers, that's really the fun part. I've done the focus groups. I don't know if you ever have, but being, on the other side of the mirror, sounds cheesy, but it's pretty fun, and you can see them experiencing concepts and samples or prototypes and passing notes to the moderator to spark up conversation. To me, that's really the fun part of like ideating and innovating, is that consumer interaction to see if these crazy ideas, do they have traction? Do other people like them the same way I do? I think there's a lot of fun in that.
Yeah, I actually got invited to a focus group or whatever your consumer thing when I was about 12. Oh. I was at Hershey. We were on tour and they came around, grabbed some kids and said, come in, and they wanted us to try hot chocolate. This is a terrible story, but I took a big old sip of that hot chocolate and burned my mouth so badly. I couldn't even finish. I had to tell them I had to go find my mom because my mouth was so burned.
Oh boy.
I'm
Wow.
like, I could have owned that company if we had just pursued that.
Yeah, but say that was my first thought. I was like, well, did you sue them? You know?
No. The second thought I had as we were talking was, I wonder what we did with all those crushed up cookies before they came out with cookie crumbles or cookie ice cream or cookies and cream ice cream. Did they throw all those broken Oreos away?
Exactly. There's a market for it. I know.
Yeah.
I
We found out.
some of the most, I think one of my most memorable projects didn't go anywhere. There was probably two of them at different companies, and they both revolved around trying to find ways to innovate around scrap and the manufacturing plant. And I don't know why, but I love that. It's like solving a problem while also driving innovation. To me, it's always been something I've had a lot of interest in doing. And I've enjoyed that. That's just, to me, that's fun innovation.
Well, right. The snack food companies now, look at all the pretzels. You got buy boxes or bags of broken pretzel pieces because they put different seasoning on them.
Yep.
And I'm just looking at it going, this is just a busted up bag of pretzels.
Yep. Exactly.
But they figured out what to do with them. Yeah. Now, as your group, your company and your group grows, what kind of people do you feel be most successful to come to work for you and for your group?
Sure. That's a good question, right? So when you look at big companies versus middle level companies, middle-sized companies and small companies, i.e. startups, my approach is different, right? To how I would search for people on the team. And I've hired at all three of those companies. And I can say that you definitely want to approach it differently for those different companies. A lot of times in the analytical world, there's a tendency to rely on your procedures and your protocols and processes that are already in place. So you have robust resources at a bigger company, right? And people are just going to be focused on the technical. And there's a lot of people that enjoy that. If I'm at a smaller company, I'm looking for people that have probably had experience at the larger companies, so they understand that process and the robustness and the procedural components, and they've clearly been able to survive from a technical aptitude standpoint. Otherwise, they would have been rooted out the larger companies. But I'm looking for those one percenters that like a little bit of the crazy, right? So there's a speed component, there's a lack of resource component. There's just rapid growth typically at a lot of the smaller companies. So when I'm looking for people, I want to know that they have some of that experience. And then they've also, not to say I want people that, doesn't play well with others, but the people that would ask the questions, right? Why are we doing this? And does it have to be done this way? Because a lot of people in big companies will just be, oh, it's always been done this way, right? And they just take it for granted. And I was one of the people historically that would always be like, this doesn't make sense. Why and it would always be like, well, we've always done it this way. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense, right? And sometimes, people just want the job done and done consistently and do it the same way every single time. And I'm looking for the people that have always questioned it, right? And been like, why are we doing it this way? There's got to be a better way, right? The people that are hungry for, process improvements, challenging the status quo. Definitely personality is a big thing for me, right? Because a lot of times in the analytical world, you find people that are incredibly smart, but a bit introverted, right? And when you look at small companies, there's a lot of cross-functional interactions, and being introverted is not always going to help you succeed, right? You have to be able to speak up. You have to be able to challenge ideas. I think that smaller companies, that's part of the culture and the need to have that explosive growth. So when I'm hiring, I'm looking for people that have always challenged the status quo and that have that personality, right?
Yeah. I think that a lot of people, when I bring this up in interviews and stuff, I ask people if they're good salesmen. And if they're an R&D person or a QA person or an engineer, like, no. And I'm like, no. We're not selling. You gotta sell your idea. I mean, how do you convince people? You're in QA. How do you convince people to wash their hands? How do you convince them? You can't just order people around. You have to sell it. I said, and I always ask people, do you have children? And they'll say, yes, I have children. I'll say, so do you demand they put their shoes on, or do you convince them it's their idea to put their shoes on?
Right.
I said, because it's going to get really bad in my house if I demand everything. It's better if I convince them that they might want to have their shoes on or their coat on,
Right.
Or eat their breakfast, And I know lots of people are like, well, they'll find out. I'm like, no, you can't have them an hour in the car and you haven't had anything to eat yet today.
Right.
I said, you got to convince people. So you have to be a good, if you're an R&D and you have a great idea.
Can you influence?
And people are shooting it down.
Right.
And you can't sell them on the, benefits and attributes of your idea. You're never going to get anywhere. You're just basically going to be doing what you're told.
Absolutely. I think you have to have the ability to influence. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Whether that's true at big companies, medium companies, small companies. I just think it's more useful at the smaller companies because they can sometimes turn on a dime. So being able to influence is pretty important, right? And I agree. That's a great point. I think I was talking towards that direction, but really being able to influence is a key component. And a lot of that, to me, when I say I'm looking for personality hires have that ability to influence, right? Tell a story and turn a bunch of no's into yeses.
So as we get to the end here, I know that you all came out with your new candy bars last week. Everything was out there on the market and all the new things. Where can people buy these now?
So I would direct you to the YouTube videos that have been launched recently. But now, you can definitely find our bars in every Walmart in the entire country.
Good.
And I believe we're going to be strategically rolling out some new partners here very soon. But I believe it's Target and Walmart right now. You can buy all of our products.
I like, I'm very interested in the dark chocolate and the dark chocolate sea salt. Those are.
Have you tried them? I would recommend you go to Walmart and buy them. They are, what do we say? They're not mid, right? I think it's the phrase that the kids use these days. They're fantastic. So I'm
going to go try.
Biased, but they're phenomenal.
Do you have a favorite candy bar?
In general. So that's funny. This should be a very easy question. And I can be like, here you go, Maureen. Before I worked in confections, I didn't like candy at all. Period. Wayne didn't do anything for me. Aside from like throwing apples and eggs at people's houses and cars. I was but no, I've grown to love candy and chocolate because as part of the job, you're eating it constantly. Now I think I'm addicted, right? That's why, right? But no, honestly, I like frozen chocolate, right? So you can just put a bar, thin chocolate bars. I really like frozen texture, snap. It really depends what I'm eating, whether I want something that's a milk or something that's a bitter dark. I keep them. I have my secret stash in my freezer that my kids don't know. And then I also occasionally like sour gummy type items as well. Just depends. I eat something sweet every day. That's a fact. And it really depends on. It's my dessert. So if you're eating dinner. Depends what wine you have. Depends what dessert I have at the end of the meal, right?
Oh, I don't think wine and chocolate go together. I know everyone else says they do. I guess it doesn't help that I don't drink red wine.
Oh, I'm sorry. What?
I can't. I wish I could.
Are you a white wine fan?
I have to. The red wines make me. When you have red hair, it usually affects you.
Well, I could also, if you don't want to do wine, I could recommend bourbon to you, Maureen. I'm a bourbon guy.
Ooh, I love bourbon.
Yep, me too. So I have like 80 bottles in my basement right now. And I can tell bourbon goes well with chocolate.
Yeah. Bourbon goes well with everything.
Touche.
Yeah, whiskey. I love whiskey. I have, I'm Irish. I prefer Irish whiskey.
Okay.
But I really wouldn't, that's like turning down a bad candy bar. I wouldn't do that either. I would go with, I could go with exquisite chocolate or good chocolate or any chocolate.
Sure.
But I like I like that stuff. I'll have to try that with chocolate. Well, Davis, thank you for spending the time with us. I appreciate it. I know you're such a busy guy.
Thank you.
And we all look forward to eating some of the candy you've made in the past. All of those non-chocolates now into the chocolate.
Fantastic.
So thanks for
Thank you for having me. I can say definitively this was the best meeting I've had today. So by far.
I do appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right.
We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.